which to me makes no sense. It seems to be that we're in a symbolic way, in a mythological way also, that these two bodies have represented the balance between the forces in the universe. And at least to me, these forces in the universe are the two forces that gives way for life to exist at all. It seems to be, otherwise we're going to have too much of one thing and not the other. I'm getting this idea about balance again, but what you're saying is that we should go only solar, if you know what I mean, and not focus on the lunar at all. Is that what you're saying?
Well, at the symbolic level, the moon's hollow metal core, which is profoundly square electric field, is not phase conjugate, would be what the hex does for charge. It isolates charge, and that's what the moon does for us. The sun is the opposite, golden ratio in the hydrogen geometry, Balmer series, all that, and so it's a charge distributor. And the balance between hex and pent, which is how DNA actually creates life, is you have the container, which is the hex, the 7-spin symmetry, the 7 valence. Then you have the projector, the 5-spin, and that's what the Anu is about. So yes, you need the projector and the container, the 7 spins of the tetracube, and the 5 spins of the projector, inside out, which is what the Anu is. And that was the Ophanum Sigil of Truth in the Cherokee Sacred Space. But on the level of astral hygiene, which I think is something that desperately needs teaching, that the moon represents the opposite of astral hygiene. So these people who run around in the full moon with all these astral entities sucking just don't have a clue what astral hygiene is. And, you know, it's the same reason a lot of people go to church, because they think they need parasites to suck on their aura. It's true. It's true. And for people who don't have anything to do with their own bliss, they need parasites to suck on their aura. We will not condemn them. But at a certain point, when you know what you need to do with your bliss, which is to eat it, to take it back inside, and to squirt it up your own Kundalini current, what you need is the opposite of a church full of parasites sucking on your aura.
That's absolutely right. Couldn't agree more. And the hex that you mentioned, that's is that a 7-cycle spin, not a 6?
Well, hex symmetry is the shadow of the tetracube, which has 7 axes, a spin tree called the 7 spin, the 7 veils, the 7. You know, the whole 7 veils story, Dance of 7 Veils. And that's the number of threads on the outside of the Anu. So it's symbolizing the fact that cubic symmetries isolate charge, because tetraoctacube symmetry always have log functions of 2 in their harmonic ratio, and that will create maximum destructive interference measurably, and that isolates charge by preventing distribution. Perfect if you're making hex for a honeycomb to store honey. However, if you want distribution, then you want the opposite of that, and biology uses pent and golden ratio, dodecaecosa, for that. So the balance between hex and pent is the balance between octave and phi. Perfect example of that is in brainwave. There are only 2 brainwave states, period. One is where your brainwave harmonics are golden ratio, and that's called bliss, peak perception, enlightenment. You become fractal, you implode, and that's called peak perception. Get immortal. And the other is when you make octaves in your brainwaves. When you make octaves in your brainwaves, you create telepathy and channeling, but you do not create bliss.
And so these two can be utilized. You can take advantage, if you will, of both. Then,
That's right.
Meaning that exactly. in some circumstances you might want to tap into the other thing and you actually use the properties of telepathy and talk with people. But then, on the other hand, you want to disconnect from that and be in your own space, in your own bliss. Is that right?
Well, to make that really practical and getting back to architecture, so I visited Gus Ciacacci's house, who introduced me to Buckminster Fuller, and his house was the shape of the top-down view of one rung of the ladder of DNA in Vermont. And in the hex part of the house, octave, cube, that's the place in the house where you go for privacy and secrets and isolation and cocooning. In the pent part of the house, that's the place where you go for no secrets and perfect sharing, and you don't want secrets and distribution and marketing and, shouting messages. And so that's nature uses hex and pent for precisely those electric reasons.
Very interesting. So again, it doesn't mean that one is good or bad in that sense. It's just what the purpose is of how we want to use those spaces, right?
Exactly. So powers of 2 will isolate charge. So if you put octaves in your headphones in binaural beats based on the octave, you will create dissociation, which is the isolation of one hemisphere from the other. If you put in the same headphones a cascade based on Fibonacci to golden ratio, which Dr. Ed Wilson did, which scared Monroe Institute half to death. When you put golden ratio in your headphones, you create transcendence, which is where the brain waves actually create golden ratio coherence going up through the crown, which is the first time transcendence was defined in brainwave literature. So that difference between hex and pent, octaves and golden ratio, it can be precisely taken into brainwave states. And so my bliss tuner invention is profoundly designed to teach that difference. And when you can make the choice, when you can choose to switch gears in your brainwaves at will, that's when you have self-empowerment.
I want to backtrack just a second or two there. You mentioned the Monroe Institute, Robert Monroe. I've read a little bit about some of the experiments and some of the accounts that some things actually went wrong there in one sense. And you mentioned that they got scared as heck. Would you care to elaborate on that? What have you heard about that, or have you talked with anyone who experienced what they did there?
I didn't know Bob very well, but I know Lori very well, Lori Monroe. So at that time that I worked there, Ed Wilson was the research director for Bob Monroe. Ed Wilson, MD, very famous, and he had been putting Fibonacci to golden ratio cascades in the headphone binaural beats to introduce brainwave states and projective remote viewing or astral travel. Mm-hmm. Bob Monroe, as Ed Wilson put it, was scared to death of that phenomenon because he saw people getting squirted out of their bodies, which is true. And so Ed Wilson left Bob Monroe at that point and came to my farm in Western New York, and we made a documentary film about this. Now, on the one hand, let's teach this story in terms of Drunvalo Melchizedek and the tetrahedral fire breath. If you visualize two tetra around your body by breathing into two opposing vortex, you make a tetra cube, and that incubates and holds within. Now, if you only do that, eventually you'll have lots of astral parasites, and you have astral hygiene nightmare. Now, Drunvalo taught that there was a next step, but he was, some people say, well, he was afraid to teach, and others said he said it was dangerous. But the next step is when you take that tetracube and you tilt your chin back 32 degrees, the chin angle of Sphinx, which is precisely the angle to rotate a cube into a dodecaecosta, which is the only time you get golden ratio. When you do that, your aura changes from hex to pent, and you implode. Now, the upside of that story is once you start imploding, that's the end of parasites because they can't handle it. Mm-hmm. The downside of that story is if you haven't sorted your memory in advance, you'll be spaced out. You'll be projected in a way that nothing shareable returns. In exactly the same way that is, if you haven't sorted your memories before you die, you won't take coherence with you. So in the same way you need to prepare to die well by sorting which memories are shareable, that is, which charge can be propagated, called pure intention, coherence, perfected, and fractality, predicts your ability to die. It predicts your ability from going from hex to pent in the image of your aura, the tetrahedral fire breath. So you can't go from hex to pent in your aura till you discover pure intention. The same thing applies.
And so did you know if any of these experiments that they did conduct, that people actually, what did they do? Did they lose their minds, or did it not come back as functional human beings again, or was it okay? Do you know?
Well, what I can say is people who just do the tetrahedral fire breath and visualize only tetras and cubes around the body, there are many reports of bleeding and astral parasites and problems. So it's not good to just stay in cubic symmetry in your aura image. On the other hand, if you don't feel you're ready, if you can't actually find something shareable in your memories, then you won't be able to actually withstand the implosion that actually sorts your aura.
Tell us a little bit more about, astral parasites. Are these just, what's your take on that then? Is it just, again, evil beings hanging around and trying to suck our energy, or is it, in that sense, I guess, can we compare them to parasites on this planet? They just latch on to the one that they, that's walking on by, if you know what I mean, a tick or whatever. And occasion occurs, if you know what I mean. The parasite will jump on you and they will suck your blood. Is that the same thing on the astral level, or are we talking about something else there?
Parasites need love too. If you take a digital photograph of a leaking power transformer, you'll see these little rods. They call it rod theory. But if you look at the geometry of that charged plasma, you'll see it's not phase conjugate, so it's going to die. So these are called ectoplasm or incubus succubus. But now if you take the same high-speed digital photograph of the ectoplasm, which is the capacitive charge plasma around a human being having some bliss experience, you'll see these orbs. And if you zoom in, you'll see dodecaecosa, and they are phase conjugate. So now this is a little piece of the plasma that learned how to implode and suck. Now you could call that a parasite, but it's just like you and me. It wants to survive.
Yes.
Now, the thing is, you can gather an infinite number of these, but the ones that have a purely distributable wave at their core will ultimately be embeddable and shareable and fractal. So when you actually have an intent, which is a biologically shareable electric wave called pure intention, which means an intention that creates survival for collective genetic memory, then there is something in your aura that can be propagated successfully and therefore will be embeddable. That's called charge implosion. It's measured as a power spectra golden ratio in your aura and your EEG. It means you're imploding. At that point, everything that's ultimately parasitic that tries to enter will only be toasted and feed you. So it's another way of saying the physics of pure intention is that will burn everything that's not shareable out of your aura. Mm. Now, at a practical level, in terms of astral hygiene, there are some exercises. If you do deep breathing and get under charged, dense water, you have the combination of oxygen saturation and you're underwater, and do that several times, you'll feel all the parasites leave your aura. The oxygen is helical, it's implosive. And so there's another exercise you can do. You can bring a comb in your inner vision down through your aura, and you see your aura as a deep blue, and astral tags or parasites or bioplasmic streamers will show up as red or black blobs in your aura, and you literally comb them out. So you literally sort your aura. This is Introduction to Astral Hygiene 101, and it's very important.
Very interesting. Have you done any kind of photography on the aura of people where you've been able to see this?
Well, goldenmean.info/orb of life, we showed the dodecaecosa structure of the plasma orbs of people having bliss. The essential work on the aura of people in general that fractality produces medical immortality, or at least clinical health, is, of course, the GDV, gas discharge visualization work of Dr. Korotkov, and we work closely with him. And he's done, there's hundreds of published papers on this. Doctors are using it. It's powerful. So aura diagnosis is now a medical skill. It's teachable. It's highly reputable. And the American Medical Association is using it. It's called GDV. For example, you can see by measurement when someone's aura has a hole burnt in it by the old-fashioned cathode CRT screens. You can see when someone's aura has a hole in it, eating too many drugs. You can understand the physics very well, that when you eat certain drugs, hard drugs, etc., you cause your aura to temporarily implode in symmetry directions which are not sustainable. So after the effect of the drug has worn off, your aura is imploded in some places, but the symmetry is not surround sound. And the result is your aura will become holy and permeable, and you'll be more susceptible to parasites and less able to survive death. So we suggest that people who have addictions learn the problem of their addiction by measuring their aura for holes medically.
That's very, very interesting. And again, the website, the link rather, you said Orb of Life. It's your website, goldenmean.info.
Orb of Life was just the ones on the orbs, but the GDV work we have at goldenmean.info/clinical intro and of course there is Dr. Korotkov, korotkov.org, and all the work that's been done on the GDV. You can see that the fractality of your aura, which is measurable, is a direct indicator of whether or not you're imploding, and that's going to tell you if you're immortal or not. It's very simple.
All right. Well, there's a lot more information there for people to dig into who want to find out more about that. I want to spend a little bit of time as well with you, Dan, and talk about some of the things that are happening right now as we speak in regards to electrical smog and all this thing with cell phones, different types of microwave frequencies that are bouncing around, Wi-Fi, what have you, electrical sockets everywhere, which means that we have frequencies around us. What's your take on all that? Is all this ultimately bad for us, and do we need to move away from these type of technologies in order to stay healthy, or what's your take on
it? goldenmean.info/microwave life and death is where we summarize the microwave literature here